Welcome to the After Effects rendering segment of our tutorial series. We've prepared render compositions for you to streamline the process of rendering out all the individual menus and transitions. So let's make sure our render queue is visible down here at the bottom. If for some reason you do not see it down here, just select Window and then select Render Queue at the bottom. Now let's go into our project panel so we can see all the different options we have for the render compositions. If you have After Effects CS3, you will be using the render compositions located in the CS3 folder. If you are using After Effects CS4 and above, you will use the render compositions from the CS4 and above folder. Since we are currently using After Effects CS5.5, we will use the render compositions from the CS4 and above folder. If you'll be rendering for PAL, you will of course use those from the PAL folder, but we are using NTSC for this example, so I'm going to go into the NTSC folder. You now have the option of rendering to SD 720 by 480 or to full HD 1920 by 1080. If you are authoring a Blu-ray disc, you will of course render to HD 1920 by 1080. If this is only for standard definition, you will simply render out the SD compositions. Now, if you'll be creating both a Blu-ray and a DVD of your project, you only need to render out the HD compositions. Now, the reason you only need to render out the HD compositions for both Blu-ray and DVD is that it can take After Effects a very long time to render out all the individual layers of your motion menu. So if you render out both the HD and the SD compositions, it will have to render out all those individual layers twice. The faster way to do it is to render out the HD version once, and then simply scale those rendered HD menus down to SD versions. And what we've done is provided you in the kit with an After Effects project file that will quickly create SD versions of those rendered HD menus. And we will show you exactly how to do that later on in this tutorial. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using the HD menus. Now, as you can see here, we have all the different segments of the menu. We have the main menu and the intro sequence combined into a single composition. If you are using CS3, you will have separate compositions for the intro and the main menu, and that just has to do with limitations with Encore CS3. We also have the scene menu and the special features menu. And then further down, we have all of the transitions. This is the transition from the main menu to the scene selection menu. This is the transition from the main menu to the special features menu. And here we have the main menu to the video, and transition from the scene menu to the main menu. And last, we have the transition from the special features menu back to the main menu. So if you'll be using all of the menus, that includes the main menu, the special features menu, and the scene selection menu, let's first start by dragging the first composition into the render queue. And the reason we only drag the first composition into the render queue is that we want to get it all set up with the proper settings and the output location so that when we drag the other ones into the render queue, they will all have the same settings. By default, your render settings should already be set at best settings. Now for the output module, if you have used our ProMotion menu kits in the past, you should have a preset created for QuickTime animation. If you have not used our templates before, or you have reinstalled After Effects, I'm going to walk you through setting up that preset. So for the output module, just click the down arrow and select Make Template. Since we already have a preset called QuickTime Animation, I'm going to just call this QuickTime Animation 2, but you can simply call it QuickTime Animation. Now we want to edit this preset, so go to Edit. We want the format to be set to QuickTime. Post-render action can be set to none. There is no need to include the project link or source XMP metadata. For the video output, the channel should be set to RGB, depth millions of colors, and color should be set to pre-multiplied matted. And then in the format options, make sure your codec is set to animation and the quality set to 100. Click OK. Make sure you are also outputting audio, so check that off and select 48 kilohertz, 16-bit stereo, and select OK. Now, every time you add a composition to the render queue, you want it to have this preset. So for movie default, make sure you set it to your QuickTime animation template. And then you can select OK. I'm just going to make sure this is set to our QuickTime animation. And now let's specify where this will be rendered to. So next to output to, just go ahead and click on the link here. So in our working folder for our project, which we've named sample project, I'm going to create a new folder and just call it menu exports. And then I'll just go into that folder and select save. If you'll be using the HD to SD project later on, you want to make sure that it retains the default name here. If at the end of the name you see an underscore and a 1, this means that the folder that you tried to save this to already had a file with that same name, so it just appended it with an underscore 1. But you want to make sure that you change the name back to its original, which does not have that underscore 1. So after you've set up the QuickTime animation as the default output module, the only thing you need to do after dragging your composition into the render queue is just set up where it will be outputting the menu to. Once you have that set up, just go ahead and select all the other menus and transitions and drag them into your render queue. If we just press the tilde key, we can see all of them. Now all of these menus and transitions will be outputted to the same folder that you specified for the first one. Now if you will not be using one or both of these submenus, just simply exclude those and their transitions from the compositions that you drag into the render queue. For example, if you will not be using the special features menu, you would simply select the main menu, the scene menu, and the transition from the main menu to the scenes, the transition from the main menu to your video, and the transition from the scene selection menu back to the main menu. You will not include the special features menu or the transitions to and from the special features menu. Of course, you also want to make sure that you do not include a button on the main menu that links to a special features menu if you exclude it. If you will only be using a main menu and none of the submenus, you only have to export the main menu and the transition from the main menu to your video. So now that you've set up all the menus and transitions that you'll be using, you are now ready to render them out. Simply press the render button in the render queue to render those out. The amount of time it takes to render out all of the motion menus will vary greatly depending on your template. Most of our ProMotion menu kits will render out between 1 and 2 hours. However, some of our most complex templates, such as Opening Night, may take between 6 and 7 hours to completely render. So I'll just go ahead and do that now, and then I will show you how to convert them to SD in a little bit. So here we are with all of our menu segments rendered out. I think it's a good time to mention that these are just intermediate files for your authoring application. As you can see, they take up a massive amount of space, upwards of 11 gigabytes, since they are nearly uncompressed. And then your authoring application will encode them to MPEG-2 so that they only take up a very small amount of space on your final disk. For a DVD, they'll take up roughly 300 megabytes of space, and on a Blu-ray, they'll take up roughly 700 megabytes. Now that's assuming you use approximately 4 pages of scene selections, and if you use fewer pages, it'll take up less space. So now we want to make SD versions of these menus. Let's go back up and locate our Motion Menu Templates folder. And then we want to cut the HD to SD project and paste it into the same folder as our rendered menus. So I'll just right click and go to Cut. And then I'll go back into our Menu Exports folder and I will simply paste it here. Again, you only need to do this if you'll be making a Blu-ray and a DVD version of your project. If you will only be creating a Blu-ray or you will only be creating a DVD, you do not need to do this step. But assuming that you will be doing both, let's go ahead and open up our HD to SD After Effects project by double-clicking on it. It just lets you know that it has to be converted from an older version to a newer version. That's okay. Just click OK. Now, it may say that some files are missing since you last saved this project. That should be completely normal, since the project is set up to load both the CS3 and CS4 render compositions. If you're using CS4 and above, you will not have those CS3 render compositions, and they will of course be missing. Also, if you did not export some of your submenus and transitions, those files will also be missing. If you happen to change the name of your rendered motion menus from their default, the After Effects project will not find them and will of course report them as being missing. In that case, it is a problem and you need to go back and change the name of those files to their original before opening up the HD to SD project. So just go ahead and click OK. Now all that we need to do is drag our SD compositions from the project panel into the render queue, just like we did with our motion menu template. I'll just go ahead and close this. And we'll go into our CS4 and above folder. And now you have the choice of converting from HD to PAL or HD to SD NTSC. For this demonstration, I'll just convert it to the SD NTSC. Here we have all of our SD compositions. And if you want to check to make sure that the HD menus were loaded correctly into After Effects, you can simply select the composition, and as long as it shows black or the menu up here, you know that it loaded that menu or transition correctly. However, if you see color bars up here, that means it did not load that menu or transition correctly, and you need to go back and make sure that it has its default name, because After Effects looks for a file with a specific name that is case sensitive. If it has been changed in any way from the default, it will not be loaded into the project. Now with that being said, just like we did with our motion menu template, we're going to drag the first one into the render queue. The output module should already be set to QuickTime Animation with best settings. We just need to confirm where it will be output to. Alright, it's going to output into our menu exports folder along with our HD menus. That's just fine. Just click Save, and then you can proceed to add the other menus and transitions to the render queue. And just as a reminder, if you did not use one of the menus and its transitions, you do not need to drag it into the render queue. So once those have been added to the render queue, you are now ready to render them out. Simply click the render button in your render queue, and those will quickly downscale those to SD. This process goes much faster than rendering the SD menus out of your motion menu template, as all it has to do is downscale the HD menu instead of having to render all the individual layers of the motion menu. So just go ahead and click Render. There's just one last thing before we finish. If you have chosen to render multiple pages of scene selection menus from After Effects using the scene selection drop zones, you might be wondering how to convert those additional pages to SD as well. Let me minimize this. As you are aware, our HD to SD project is set up to only downscale a single scene selection menu, but you may have 2 or 3 or more. Let's just bring up an example of that. So you might have a scene menu 1, a scene menu 2, a scene menu 3, as well as transitions from those additional scene menus back to the main menu. So to convert multiple pages of scene selections from HD to SD that you have manually rendered out of After Effects, simply follow these instructions. So after you've gone ahead and rendered out all the compositions for your menus and transitions, including the first of the scene selection menus, you need to go into the project panel and replace the asset that After Effects is loading to downscale that scene selection menu. So go up into the Assets folder, into the HD folder, locate your scene menu, right-click on the scene menu, go to Replace Footage with File, and then you can replace it with the next page of your scene selections, and then go to Open. Now with that asset replaced, you can just go down to your render compositions, and now you can drag the scene menu into your render queue again. So just go ahead and render that out, and then after it's complete, you can go back up and replace that same asset with additional pages if you have them. With additional scene pages, you should also have additional transitions from those scene pages back to the main menu. So just go ahead and replace that transition asset as well. Right-click, replace footage with file, and select the additional transitions and render those out. And the reason why you don't have additional transitions from the main menu to those second or third pages of scene menus is that the main menu will only transition to the first page, whereas you can transition from any one of those additional scene pages back to the main menu. Of course, if you really wanted to, you could create a button on your main menu that transitions directly to your second page of scene selections, if, for example, that second page was for a different video on your disk. In that situation, you would have an additional transition from the main menu to the second page of scene menus. Again, you only need to do this if you've rendered out multiple pages of scene selection menus from After Effects when using the scene selection box drop zones. If you are letting your authoring application generate those multiple pages, this step is not necessary. All right, let's just expand our render queue again. And you are now ready to proceed to authoring your motion menu in Adobe Encore or DVD Studio Pro. But again, we highly recommend you use Adobe Encore.